Hi, I'm John
Green, and this is Crash Course U.S. History.
And today, as you can see, we're outside to enjoy the beautiful American landscape. Stan, roll the intro. So American foreign relations obviously began with the Europeans invading the American continent. In the 1500s, Europe was going through an imperialist phase, but didn't technically end until sometime after World War II. That's why in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, sparking a race to colonize the New World. The Spanish got there first and claimed the most land, followed by the French and finally the English. Imperialism was partially driven by mercantilism. The economic theory centered around regulating trade to increase a nation's power by creating the perfect trade balance, one better found with the help of colonies, which produced raw materials and purchased manufactured goods from the mother country. As such, the European powers heavily encouraged colonial growth. Then in the 1750s, there were these radical new ideas pouring in from across the Atlantic, insane concepts like the inalienable rights of man. These were the ideas of the Enlightenment, which took fruit in America and flourished. They're represented in all of America's most iconic founding documents. After America adopted the Constitution, which was based on the aforementioned ideas, the first question was whether the economy would be industrial or agrarian. Hamilton's industrial dream won out in the end, ensuring America had a strong economy and a good reputation as a borrower, which still exists as evidenced by our $18 trillion national debt. In response to yet another Anglo-French war in 1793, Washington made the Neutrality Proclamation, which began the unbroken American tradition of isolationism, except for like everything else we talk about in this video. At the same time, Britain was making passive-aggressive attacks on American sovereignty, almost resulting in war before the signing of Jay's Treaty, which was incredibly unpopular because it didn't solve anything. We actually ended up having to pay debts to Britain. The Spanish were so frightened by the ideas of close Anglo-American relations that they gave us a bunch of stuff in Pinckney's treaty, so it wasn't all bad. We'll skip John Adams because he didn't actually do that much for American expansion, but John C. Calhoun, would you not?
Hi, I'm Green, and John's done enough talking for today. We'll skip John Adams because he didn't do much for American expansion besides like ensuring America survived to continue expanding by avoiding the Franco-American alliance left over from the revolution with the Convention of 1800. His successor, Jefferson, was forced to create a small navy to fight the Tripolitan War. We won, but you still couldn't say much for the gunboats. More memorable was the Louisiana Purchase, in which Napoleon sold us a massive amount of land for $15 million. Later, Jefferson overestimated the significance of American trade in responding to the continued British impressment of American sailors with an embargo. Madison made the same mistake, which combined with conflicts with Native Americans drove the U.S. to declare war on Britain in 1812. That mess ended with the Treaty of Ghent, which changed nothing. 4 years later, Monroe finalized the northern border of Louisiana, courtesy of the Treaty of 1818. Andrew Jackson conquered Florida, allowing us to force the Florida Purchase Treaty, in which Spain gave away Florida and claims to Oregon in exchange for Americans giving up claims to Texas and defining the western border of Louisiana. Then, after all the chaos of the Napoleonic Wars, European monarchs were determined to snuff out democracy, leading Monroe to warn off European invasion in his famous Monroe Doctrine, which also said that America couldn't intervene in Europe. It doesn't mean anything until Polk, so go ahead and forget about it. Now, you may notice that this time period, Americans were getting a lot of land. This led them to believe the manifest destiny, or the God-given right of white Americans to rule North America from sea to shining sea. Stan, can I get a libertage?
In 1842, the Webster-Ashburn Treaty ended the settlement of the northern border of Maine, narrowly avoiding a third Anglo-American war. 2 years later, Polk wrote on the back of his 4 goals, 2 of which were taking all of Oregon, California, and Texas. He secured half of Oregon territory with a creatively named Oregon Treaty. Oh, historians, why do you suck so much at naming things? California and Texas were harder to get. Polk had to push for war and defeat Mexico before negotiating the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which secured a massive territory, including the coveted land, in exchange for about $18 million. In the 1750s, the Industrial Revolution finally reached the U.S., where it took a while to get going. Let's go to the top one. Since there was more than enough land for everybody in America, there was a general lack of interest in industrialization. However, by the early 1800s, the invention of the cotton gin, sewing machine, and spinning machine, alongside the steamboat and the railroad, made cotton king in the South and attracted hundreds of thousands of immigrants to work in northern factories. A whole bunch of stuff was happening concurrently overseas in the 1800s, resulting in lots of people coming to the United States. First of all, the invention of the transoceanic steamboat made fare much cheaper. Second, life in Europe, to use a technical historian term, wasn't so hot anymore. The European population was rapidly outstripping available land. In Ireland, potato famine sent masses of young Irishmen sailing to America to escape starvation and make good on the golden promises of the Homestead Act. Similarly, the revolutions of 1848 resulted in floods of political dissidents fleeing Europe to settle on the western frontier.
U.S. imperialism from the 1880s on was driven by the vast range of factors. Booming population and production make people clamor for new markets. Popular culture trumpeted nationalism and the white man's burden. A naval arms race sparked by the influence of sea power upon history created demand for control of foreign ports to use as coaling stations and naval bases, as well as canal across the isthmus. The first victim of the push for overseas colonies was Hawaii. The Americans there owned sprawling plantations worked by Asian immigrants, leading to calls for which the annexation of Hawaii, which happened in 1898. Oh, it's time for the mystery doc? Alright, so you guys know the drill. I guess the name and author of the author of the mystery doc, and if I get it wrong, I get shocked. So what does this say? The message has undeceived insurgents who expected something else and has paralyzed the action of Congress, but I consider it bad. Besides the natural and inevitable coarseness of which he repeats with all the press and public opinion of Spain has said of Weyler, it shows more what McKinley is, weak and catering to the rabble, and besides a low politician who desires to leave a door open to me and to stand well with the jingles of his party. Well, the author of the mystery doc calls McKinley weak. And I really don't know much about McKinley apart from the fact that he was president during the 1890s. Some stuff happened during the Gilded Age, I guess, and he just got assassinated. So I'm guessing that the person who wrote this is William Jennings Bryan. Oh, now I have to shock myself with this glorified pink highlighter that celebrates my misery. I hate my life. I hate my life. Ah!
So in the early 1900s, America got involved in more wars despite supposed isolationism. The De Lome letter, intercepted from the Spanish foreign ambassador, combined with yellow journalism propaganda about Spanish atrocities in Cuba, fueled American anger at Spain. The U.S. seized the opportunity to intervene on Cuba's behalf in the Cuban War of Independence, starting the Spanish-American War. The U.S. quickly defeated the Spanish and took control of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, and Cuba. Now, wars are never splendid, but this war was, according to contemporary Americans, because it was a quick victory with minimal casualties, which reunified the Union, ended Spain's empire status, and made the U.S. a world power in the eyes of Europe. At home, anti-imperialists protested annexation for various reasons: its inherent violation of the social contract, its impracticality, or the move away from isolationists. Pro-imperialists felt it was the duty of Americans to spread democracy, civilization, and Christian God, or they just wanted to get rich. As a result of annexation, colonial subjects did gain some domestic improvements, in the case of the Philippines only after a viciously suppressed rebellion, though they were utterly deprived of sovereignty. Stupid imperialism always ruining everything. Meanwhile, China was falling to foreign vultures, leading to John Hay's open door policy, in which everybody agreed to respect certain Chinese rights, except nobody asked the Chinese anything about the whole thing, sparking the Boxer Rebellion, which was brutally crushed, and then China was ruthlessly extorted. Panama was a different matter, as the U.S. got involved only to build a canal which would ease shipping and naval defense in the Western Hemisphere. U.S. involvement, combined with its interference in Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Guam, worsened American relations with Latin America, especially after the Roosevelt quarterly involved the U.S. in Latin American finances. Wilson, for all his talk of morality, ended up making relations even worse. They didn't improve until FDR's good neighbor policy. Next, we move to World War I. The U.S. returned to isolationism in the early 1900s, only sending economic aid to the Allied powers until it was finally driven to declare war. Most Americans were divided about entering the war for some time, but the Zimmermann telegram was the last straw. The telegram was sent by Germany to Mexico and promised the return of territories lost in the Mexican-American War if it attacked America. Combined with Germany's violation of the Sussex Pledge, it was enough for Congress to declare war. We entered World War I pretty late to our advantage. American doughboys arrived in France in 1918, renewing Allied morale and overwhelming the Germans. On the home front, the war economy made the nation an industrial powerhouse, especially since no battles were fought on U.S. soil. Wilson was pushing to make the world safe for democracy. The federal government used propaganda campaigns and the Espionage and Sedition Act to suppress anti-war sentiment. The federal government, in its wartime regulation of the economy, also assisted labor unions in improving working conditions across the nation. A brief Red Scare after World War I damaged labor unions. America tried to restrict the renewed flow of immigrants which came in the post-war years, sparking discriminatory laws and rekindling the KKK. Agricultural overproduction left over from the war led into the Great Depression, and the web set up by the Treaty of Versailles spread it worldwide. John C. Cal frickin' who?
Now, the Treaty of Versailles, stuck between Britain and France, tried to punish Germany with huge war reparations that ruined its economy and allowed Adolf Hitler to establish a Nazi regime, hooray, that sought to conquer the entire world and, kill everyone that didn't fit his profile of the Aryan race. World War II started after Nazi Germany and its Axis buddies began taking over various neighboring nations. As it had in World War I, the U.S. joined the war relatively late, provoked by Japan in the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. joined the Allies alongside China, Britain, France, and Soviet Russia. It fought the Japanese on the Pacific front using the island-hopping strategy while bombing the Germans with Britain and the USSR. The war in Europe ended after the D-Day assault on Normandy. Japan was less willing to surrender, so the U.S. started dropping atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, ending World War II and killing 210,000 Japanese. The most significant outcome of World War II was the emergence of the US and the USSR as the sole nuclear powers. There was a fundamental ideological conflict in that the USSR was communist and tried to force several Eastern European nations and East Germany to become communist. The US and Western European nations wanted to be capitalist. Huzzah! The World Cold War begins.
As a result of the Cold War, the United States abandoned isolationism as evidenced by involvement in the UN and NATO. We also got more involved in the world economy. Truman used the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan as policies of containment against communist influence by giving money to nations against communism. Because once again, no battles were fought in America, we got absurdly rich producing what Europe couldn't at the moment. However, the lack of oil led to further involvement in the Middle East, where our addiction to natural gas and constant interference would result in a plethora of energy crisis and anti-American terrorist groups. And we all know how well that's been going. Domestically, the Cold War led to a second and much worse Red Scare and a rise in conservatism. Because of it, liberal people and programs were labeled communist and consigned to the ash heap of history. Anger at the Cold War failures and domestic issues produced the counterculture of the 60s, which started a massive cultural shift in America and consolidated itself much later. Reagan ended détente with a massive military buildup. Meanwhile, the USSR was weakening because people love owning things, and that's what communism isn't about. Reagan took advantage of that with a strategic defense initiative, basically a mock-up Star Wars plan to scare the USSR. During and since his presidency, Latin America and the Middle East became even more anti-American thanks to continued interference in all the wrong ways. While the USSR has obviously dissolved since, Cold War antagonism still plague us today. The proper course of action in the Middle East and Latin America is still a hot topic for debate. Our actions overseas and next door will always have repercussions, and it's important to continuously evaluate how we interact with other countries. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.